Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our third and final segment of Nationalism and Exoticism. We have three more orchestral pieces that we're going to check out. Again, tone poems and program symphonies for the most part. We're going to kick off our listening selection with Dvorak's The Spinning Wheel. So this is, again, a single self-contained piece of music that tells a story. And therefore it is a tone poem versus a program symphony. The orchestra that we're going to be listening to is rather large and incredibly diverse. Much like the other listening examples that we've covered, we're going to hear a lot of interplay between the different families. So between brass and percussion and the string family, it's not just so string-centric as we heard in the classical era, or that we will continue hearing from pieces in the classical era. Luckily, this example, I have picked a female conductor, so a little bit more diversity there as well. So let's go ahead and listen to Dvorak's The Spinning Wheel and see what else sort of rings true for being characteristics that are sort of a part of this canon of music.
Karina Kanalakis back onto the stage to conduct this epic and bloodthirsty tale, which we're looking forward to very much indeed. This is Dvorak's The Golden Spinning Wheel.
Starts right off with percussion. Strings are the accompaniment force here, whereas the two horns in this arrangement is something we call hunting horns. They're set at perfect fit apart from one another in terms of interval and distance. Answered and accompanied by the double reeds that have a kind of similar sound to the horns and therefore have a bit of a and also we have a very steady pulse though. I'm sure that's not always going to be the case, but we've listened to a number of pieces that on a section by section basis have a kind of metric feel to them. We went from having the entire ensemble to now more selected voices, a woodwind feature. So again, the Romantic era composers were really interested in this idea of stark contrast within a piece, going from everyone playing to only a small select group of the orchestra playing. We're listening to a secondary instrument right now, the English horn as a soloist, doing a sort of polyphonic texture with this solo violinist. Inclusion of the harp really only comes around after the Romantic era, or during and after the Romantic era as well. This piece, this tone poem, is 30 minutes long in its entirety, but you can be sure that it's going to go through a number of shifts. We have some moderate extended techniques using pizzicato or plucking the string instruments, the double basses in particular. So far, we haven't had a lot of focus on the string family. It's been mostly about the woodwinds or the brass family. We did have that one cello feature, which was quite lovely. Strings are taking over. It's probably the first time that they really get to take on the main melodic idea. All right. Like I said, the piece goes on for quite a bit, but I really encourage you to visit a little bit more of this piece. Perhaps not as dark or exciting as some of the other selections, but a lot of the Romantic era composers wrote some really beautiful orchestral arrangements of this work. So. In any case, we're going to go ahead and listen to our next example, which actually is a piece of absolute music, a piece that ends up not having a programmatic detail to it. And Johannes Brahms, the next composer that we will be talking about, ends up being a composer who is more interested in absolute music by and large. If you look at his catalog of works, most of them end up being pieces that are do not evoke a programmatic detail. He kind of follows a little bit more in the footsteps of the first Viennese school, who we will talk about in another lecture in its entirety. So let me go ahead and pull up our next listening example, which hopefully will be familiar to you. It is in a set, but it's called Hungarian Dances. So we're going to listen to Hungarian Dance number 5. All right, so we're going to listen to Johannes Brahms and his Hungarian Dance number 5. This is, again, a piece of absolute music, but it is written for orchestra. The reason it's absolute versus programmatic is because the title is not trying to evoke a particular kind of narrative or story. It is actually letting you know like the source of the melodic material, and that's about it. So hopefully you will recognize some of this, but much like composers from the classical era, which Brahms was more interested in following, we're going to have a little bit more of a tendency to listen to the string family as being the major carrier of the melody. So let's go ahead and take a listen. Notice how we're gradually getting faster. definitely slow and monophonic to quick and homophonic. Slow, monophonic. Quick, homophonic. Slow, monophonic. Everyone's moving. Quick and homophonic. Wonderful. Hopefully that didn't get cut for copyright, but if it did, please revisit it. It's only 3 minutes or a little bit over 3 minutes. So Brahms as a composer ends up being a little bit more conservative in terms of his style. He's not so interested in using extended techniques, but there's lots of play between tempo and meter. Where we're going from suddenly very slow and monophonic, hopefully as you heard, to quick and heterophonic towards the end there. And the string family was the instrumental family that was most responsible for pushing forth the feeling of melody. Wonderful. Great. So we have one more example that we're going to listen to. That's from that's by Gustav Holst. It's a program symphony or an orchestral suite. It's a combination of multiple movements, and it's called The Planets. And it's a sort of musical representation of the Greek or Roman idea of the planets. So we have, for example, Mars, the bringer of war, that we will listen to, but there are other movements within the set that are included in the playlist that you should certainly check out. They are incredibly cinematic, really wonderfully beautiful pieces. So Mars, the bringer of war, happens to be an example that is in, or at least a large section of it is in asymmetrical time. We're going to have a feeling of 5 pulses that are the larger grouping of the piece for our beginning idea. And the string family is all playing a technique called colegno. It means to play with the wood of the bow. So you're going to hear a very percussive oriented technique in the string family, but it's mostly going to be about the brass family, which again is a trend that we've heard a number of times in these pieces by Romantic era composers. So let's go ahead and listen in to Gustav Holst, the Planets Suite, very particularly the movement for Mars, the bringer of war. So notice the colegno technique. We're going to have some call and response within the brass family. anyone recognizes that from a particular film score. If you were kind of wondering like, oh gosh, that might sound familiar from like Star Wars, yeah, you're absolutely right. It was used in the original temp track that John Williams ended up listening to as a reference for the original score. So he definitely was strongly influenced by this piece, so much so that it's as though it shows up in the film score. It's a little bit different, to be honest. It's in simple time versus asymmetrical time, but it has a lot of the same rhythmic drive, this jigga-da-da-da sort of feel, and a lot of the same melodic curvatures and intervallic relationships from note to note. So if you thought that sounded familiar, that is perhaps why. Wonderful. There are other movements of Gustav Holst's The Planets that are much different in quality and characteristic, and that's kind of the point of multi-movement works, is to create contrast between and amongst the movements. As we've heard, hopefully, through these pieces, that there are a number of similarities between our listening selections today. Biggest takeaways. The orchestra is not so much about the string family alone. It's about diversity within and amongst all the other instrumental families. So we have a little bit more of a highlight on brass instruments, woodwind instruments, and percussion instruments. We also have a little bit more complexity when it comes to rhythm and meter, meaning that in terms of the classical era, once a piece starts in a particular time signature or meter, it tends to stay that way for the entirety of the piece. In terms of the Romantic era stuff that we listen to, there's much more flexibility between fast sections and slow sections within one piece of music. The big forms that we talked about during this lecture were tone poems and program symphonies. They're both kinds of program musics, which means that they're a kind of form that tells a musical story. Musical stories, they don't have to be told with the use of leitmotifs, although they are very useful. So a leitmotif is a melody that represents a person, place, character, idea, or situation, and we heard them in a number of pieces today. Probably most clearly in Paul Dukas' The Sorcerer's Apprentice, although they are definitely a part of other pieces like Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade. Very good. So please, part of the important part of this class is listening to the listening examples more than once. So after you're done with this lecture, what I would do is review the listening examples using the link that I include in this video, and also reviewing the notes that you took and my lecture notes that I leave for you in Blackboard, and that I projected as a part of the first part of this video. So very good. Best of luck on the quiz, which you also need to be taking soon if you finished this video. Again, my suggestion, go back and review your notes before taking the exam. All right, leave me any questions in the comment section. Talk to you all later. Bye.